"Where did you get that name?" The pen slipped from Victoria Hale's hand and struck the marble floor, turning one slow circle. The man across the desk wore the cleanest shirt he owned. He had come to apply for a janitor's job. He held the hand of a little girl whose pink shoe was untied. 39 years earlier, Victoria had written that same name on the back of a hidden photograph. She had written it in the hand of a 19-year-old girl. She had buried that child 39 years ago. Or she had been told she did. She could buy almost anything in America. She could not buy one answer. And he had no idea why. Before the week ended, he would give away the last thing his father left him. 4 days before the rent was due, Daniel Mercer stood in his kitchen at 6 in the morning. He ran an iron over the collar of a blue shirt that had been washed so many times the color had gone soft as dust. He wasn't ironing it because it was his best shirt. He was ironing it because it was the cleanest one he owned. A man who shows up to ask for a job scrubbing floors learns early that the floor isn't what he's being judged on. That was the whole reason he was going downtown that morning. There was no nobler version of it. The rent was due in 4 days and he did not have it. That was the truth. There had been a time when he did not think about rent at all. For 11 years, he had repaired elevators in some of the tallest buildings in Chicago, riding the cars down the shafts with a flashlight in his teeth, learning the sound a cable makes 8 months before it fails. He knew how to fix things with his hands. He knew how to stand in a mechanical room at 2 in the morning with a diagram he had never seen before and reason his way through it. He knew how to come home so tired his arms shook and not say a word about it to anyone. Then Anna got sick. Everything after that happened in an order so ordinary it did not feel like a collapse while it was happening. He took fewer contracts so he could be home. Fewer contracts meant he was low on the list when the company started trimming in the spring. 1 missed paycheck turned into 2. The savings went into groceries and into school clothes for a girl who kept growing. It went into hospital bills that arrived as hospital bills do after the patient was already gone. Being a good father, he had learned, does not stop the world from mailing you envelopes marked final notice. His daughter Lily was 8 years old and she was coming with him because the school had closed for teacher training and a sitter cost $11 an hour he did not have. She had a beaded braid and 1 pink sneaker she refused to let him tie. She was learning, and learning took time, and time was the one thing he still gave her freely. On the train, she counted the stops out loud. He watched the tunnel lights go past and thought about the steel toolbox under his bed, the one with the handle worn smooth from a man's grip. He did not think about it long. They arrived at the Hale Global Tower 20 minutes early. It was a habit from the working years when being early meant you got the good assignments. It was also a habit from something else, something older that he had never once put into words. Inside the lobby, he took his hat off. He kept his hands where people could see them. He said good morning to the security guard, and he said it first. 52 floors above him, Victoria Hale was reading an acquisition summary and not absorbing a single line of it. She was, by most measures, anyone bothered to keep, one of the wealthiest women in America. The company carried her name because she had built it floor by floor out of a printing operation her father had left her and a temperament that did not permit doubt. She had a corner office with glass on 2 sides, an assistant named Ellen Ward who had been with her for 19 years, and a private elevator she almost never used. Money had bought her a great many things. It had never once bought her an answer to the only question she carried, which was not, "Where is my child?" She had buried that question a long time ago, but a smaller and more corrosive one. Should she have believed her father? She had been 19 when she met Samuel Mercer. He fixed radios at night in a shop with a cracked front window and studied engineering during the day, and he was the first person she had ever met who argued with her without apologizing afterward. He was stubborn about small things and unbothered by large ones. He had a way of taking something apart on the counter and explaining it while he worked, and she had spent that whole winter finding reasons to bring him things that were broken. Her father did not hate Samuel because Samuel was cruel or dishonest or careless with her. He hated Samuel because Samuel had nothing. He said it plainly more than once at the dinner table as a matter of arithmetic. Love, he told her, was a luxury, and people like the Hales could not afford to purchase it at that price. For years afterward, Victoria wondered whether that had been the whole reason. She never found the courage to ask him. When she was 20, she got pregnant, and she made the worst decision of her life. Her father explained calmly over the course of a single evening exactly what he could do to a young man with no money, no family behind him, and 2 years left on a scholarship. He did not raise his voice. He never had to. She left the city 3 weeks later without telling Samuel where she was going. She only told him one thing on the last night, standing on the sidewalk outside the shop with her coat buttoned wrong: the name she had chosen. She had written it on the back of a photograph of him and hidden the picture where no one would ever look. 4 months later, a doctor told her there had been complications. She was told the baby had not survived. She was told, and she was 20, and there was no one left in the room to tell her otherwise, and so it became a fact and stayed one for 39 years. What they had told Samuel she never learned. She only knew that he never came looking for her. She had built the rest of her life on that silence, and the life she built ran on a simple principle. Anything broken could be solved with enough resources and a clear instruction to the right person. At 10 minutes after 9 that Thursday morning, she walked past the facilities office on her way in from the garage, as she did every Thursday, because the facilities office sat directly off the main lobby, and there was no other way through. The interview took less than 9 minutes. The hiring manager, a man named Ted Halloran, who had 40 applications to get through before lunch, barely opened the folder in front of him. No custodial experience. Every place I've worked, I cleaned up after myself. That's not what I meant. Daniel nodded once. He said thank you for the time. He stood, picked up his daughter's hand, and turned toward the doors, and he did not say anything else because saying anything else had never once helped in a room like that one. Lily asked if they were done, and he said they were, and he made his voice sound light when he said it. They were halfway across the lobby when she pulled on his sleeve and pointed. An old man in a wheelchair had knocked a paper cup off the arm of his chair near the elevator bank. The coffee had gone out across the polished stone in a wide, spreading tongue, and it was moving slowly and without any drama at all toward the base of a floor outlet, where a black extension cord ran to a cleaning cart nobody was standing near. 3 employees crossed that stretch of floor in the time it took Daniel to see it. The first stepped around the edge of the spill with his phone at his ear. The second lifted her bag to her shoulder and went wide. The third did not appear to notice it. None of them did anything wrong. They were on their way somewhere, and it was 9 in the morning. Daniel let go of Lily's hand and told her to stand by the pillar. Then he crossed the floor, crouched, and pulled the extension cord out of the outlet before he touched anything else. Only after the plug was in his hand and lying dry on the stone did he take the napkins from the old man's lap tray. Then he took the folded rag from his own back pocket and with slow, careful strokes worked the coffee back toward the center of the spill instead of pushing it outward. The old man kept apologizing. His hands were unsteady, and he said he was sorry 3 separate times, and each time Daniel shook his head without looking up. "I'm sorry. I've made a mess of your morning." "You've got nothing to be sorry for." He got the last of it with the dry half of the rag, checked the outlet plate with 2 fingers to be sure it had stayed clean, and only then plugged the cord back in. He asked the old man if he wanted another cup, and when the old man said no thank you, he stood, folded the wet rag inward so it would not drip on, and went and found a trash can before he went back for his daughter. From the second-floor mezzanine, Victoria watched all of it. She noticed the order, and it lodged there. That was the thing she could not let go of afterward. Anyone kind would have wiped up the coffee. Almost no one would have unplugged the cord first. No one would have moved that fast without pausing to think. It was the sort of motion hands remember long before the heart catches up. By the time she reached her floor, she had already told Ellen to pull the morning's facilities applications. 11 minutes later, the folder came up rejected and stamped heading back to the file room. Victoria opened it standing at her desk with a pen still in her hand. The name was printed at the top in block capitals, first and last. The pen slid from her fingers, hit the marble, and turned one slow circle before it stopped. She stood for a while, her hand still shaped around where the pen had been. Then she told herself the obvious thing, the reasonable thing, the thing any sensible woman would tell herself. Mercer was not a rare name. There were thousands of them. A last name meant nothing. A first name meant nothing either because parents in this country had been choosing that first name for 200 years. She told herself all of it. Then she picked up the phone and heard herself say, "Find him before he leaves the building." It was though she would not recognize it for weeks. The first time in 39 years she had given an order she could not justify. Daniel and Lily were 15 feet from the revolving doors when the security guard caught up to them and asked them to come back. Daniel felt his stomach drop straight through the floor. He turned around with his hands loose and open at his sides. He asked politely whether there was a problem. He was already running through it, the cord, the outlet, the old man's chair. He wondered whether he had touched something he had no business touching, whether wiping up a spill in a lobby he did not work in counted as interfering with company property. When you have spent enough years near the bottom, you learn that being called back is never good news. The guard only said that Ms. Hale would like to see him upstairs. The elevator opened onto a floor unlike anything Daniel had stood in before. All pale stone and glass and low white furniture, so quiet he could hear his own shoes. Sunlight came across it in long, clean bars. Lily's hand tightened around two of his fingers and stayed there. Victoria was standing by the window when they came in. She asked them to sit. She said she had seen what he did in the lobby. She said she had a few questions. "Mr. Mercer, who gave you that name?" "My father did, ma'am." "Did you know him?" "Your father, that's a strange interview question." He said it without an edge, the way a man does when he is trying to give the other person a way out of an awkward moment. Victoria did not take it. She was still standing. "What was his name?" "Samuel." The word went into that room, and nothing came back out of it. Victoria's hand found the edge of the window frame. Her eyes closed and stayed closed, and Daniel watched a woman whose photograph he had seen on the front of a magazine at a checkout counter turn into someone standing at the edge of something very old and very deep. When she spoke again, her voice had lost most of itself. Is he still living? 7 years ago." Victoria turned back to the glass. Outside, 52 floors down, the city went on with its mourning. And she looked at it and did not appear to see any of it. It was Lily who broke the silence, because she was 8 and the silence had gone on too long for her. "Did you know my grandpa?" "No, honey. Ms. Hale doesn't—" "Yes." She said it to the window. Then she turned around and looked at the man in the faded blue shirt and the little girl with one shoe untied, and Daniel had the distinct and disorienting sense that she was not seeing either of them. He waited for more, and more did not come. What she gave him instead was a version of the truth with the middle taken out of it, that she had known Samuel Mercer a long time ago, when they were both young, before any of this. That he had been a good man. That she had not seen him in a very long while. "My father never mentioned you." He did not mean it as an accusation. He meant it the way a man says something that does not add up. Victoria's answer came fast, as if it had been sitting in her mouth for 4 decades waiting for someone to ask. "He wouldn't have. I don't deserve to be mentioned kindly." Daniel sat there in the sunlight with his daughter's hand in his, in a building where he had just been told he was not qualified to mop floors, across from a woman worth more money than he could hold in his head, and he understood 2 things clearly and 1 thing not at all. He understood that this had stopped being an interview. He understood that whatever was happening in this room had started before he was born. And he did not understand, not yet, not by a single inch, that he was the one it had happened to. Consider the three people who walked around that coffee. None of them did anything wrong. They were busy and it was early and someone else would handle it. But here is the strange part: the person with the least to give is so often the one who stops. If you see a small thing today that needs doing and nobody has claimed it, do it. Not so that someone sees you. Do it because a person becomes who he is in exactly those seconds when no one is watching at all. Everything. Victoria came away from the window and sat down across from them, and the questions began again. And they were no longer disguised as anything. Do you have other family, Mr. Mercer? Daniel looked at his daughter, who had discovered that the white leather chair swiveled and was testing this discovery in small increments. Just her. And on Samuel's side, cousins and aunt, anyone? Nobody. It was him and me, and then it was him and me and my mother, and then it was just me. Victoria's hands were flat on her knees. Did your father ever tell you where you were born? A hospital in Milwaukee. Why? She did not answer. She could not, because Daniel Mercer had not been born in Milwaukee. He had been born in Chicago, in a hospital on the near west side, on a Tuesday in March. Victoria Hale knew this the way a person knows the shape of her own hands, because she had been in the room. She had been 20 years old, and she had counted the tiles on the ceiling. She had never once in 39 years been able to stop counting them. Daniel watched her face. Something in him shifted from politeness to something harder. He had spent the last 3 months being handled by the unemployment office, by the collections line, by men like Ted Halloran, who looked at a folder instead of a person. He had absorbed all of it without complaint, because complaining had never once produced a result. But this was different. This woman had pulled him out of a lobby. She was asking him where he was born. Ms. Hale, what are you not telling me? It was the only time in the whole of it that he pushed anybody. Victoria opened her mouth. Whatever was going to come out of it never did. The door opened, and Ellen Ward came in with a file folder held in both hands, the way a person carries something she has already read. The first document was a birth certificate. It was Daniel's birth certificate, the amended one filed when he was 3 months old, changing the place of birth and removing a line that had previously carried a mother's name. He had never seen it before. He had seen the copy his father kept in the fireproof box in the hall closet. It had said Milwaukee, and he had used it to get a driver's license and a marriage license and a job, and he had never had a single reason to doubt it. My mother was sick. My father always said there were complications. There were. The rest of the file was thicker than it should have been, and Ellen set it down and left without being asked to. 22 months earlier. Hale Global had acquired a legal records archive in Springfield, a shell of a company holding 6 decades of hospital and court filings on paper, purchased for the storage contracts attached to it, and digitized in a batch process nobody in the building had personally supervised. Victoria had signed off on it in a meeting that lasted 11 minutes. The empire she had built to bury the past had, without asking her, dug it back up and filed it alphabetically. There were 3 things in that folder that could not be argued with. A maternity record from a hospital in Chicago, dated the March that Daniel had spent his whole life believing he was born in Wisconsin. A tissue typing sheet from the same admissions, the kind of thing hospitals ran then for reasons that had nothing to do with paternity and everything to do with blood banking matched against a sample the archive had cross-indexed decades later. And a name typed in a clerk's even hand on the line where the mother's name belonged. Victoria Hale. Daniel read it twice. Then he turned the amended certificate over and looked at the bottom where the corrections were attested. He found the line for the informant, and the signature on it was his father's. Samuel Mercer had signed the paper himself. He had gone to a county office with a 3-month-old, and he had changed the story of where that child came from, and he had signed his own name to it in the same handwriting Daniel had seen on 1,000 invoices from the radio shop. and beneath it on the witness line, in a looping hand, with the loop on the capital R that Daniel had seen on every note ever taped to a refrigerator door in his childhood. "Lunch is in the blue container, don't forget your gloves. I love you. Be good," was the signature of Ruth Mercer. He recognized the handwriting before he read the name. His mother. The woman who had raised him. She had signed it as a witness, which meant she had been standing there, which meant she had known. She had gone on knowing for the next 34 years through every packed lunch and every double shift and every night she sat on the edge of his bed when he had a fever, and she had never said one word. Nobody in the room said anything. Daniel put the paper down on the low white table very carefully, the way a man sets down something he is afraid he might otherwise throw. "No," and he stood up and took a step back. "I thought you were dead." The words landed in the sunlight and lay there. She heard them herself and heard how insufficient they were, and did not try to improve on them. Then she turned her head and looked at the child. Lily had stopped swiveling. She was sitting with her hands in her lap in a leather chair too big for her feet nowhere near the floor, the beads in her braid catching the light, the pink shoe still untied. She was watching the adults with the particular patience of a child who has learned that grown-ups sometimes need a minute. Victoria had walked into her office that morning with a calendar, a merger, and a life. It had not once occurred to her that she had a granddaughter. Daniel did not cry, and he did not shout, and that was the strangest part of it. He stood in a room full of sunlight and felt absolutely nothing except a high, clean ringing like the sound a cable makes when it is about to go. He looked at the woman as though she had begun speaking a language he had heard once as a child and never learned. Then he looked at his daughter and thought with terrible practicality that she had not eaten since 7. Then he looked back at the woman who had just told him that the whole of his life might have been built on a lie. And so it turned out that Victoria Hale had not gone still that morning because she recognized a father in a stranger's name. She had gone still because the man who came to apply for a job scrubbing her floors appeared to be the child she had spent 39 years mourning. Stop here for a second and something strange becomes visible. There was no villain in that room. There was a girl of 19 who was frightened by an older man and believed what she was told. There was a man of 39 who had spent his whole life certain he was born in Milwaukee. And there was a father who had walked into a county office and rewritten the origin of his own son, not because he was ashamed of him, but because someone had told him the boy's mother did not want him, and he was terrified that one day those people would change their minds. He hid the child the way a man hides the only thing he has left, and the one who set all of it in motion had been under the ground for years, out of reach of any accusation anyone might want to make. That is the cruelest arithmetic of a family secret. By the time the truth surfaces, the person who ought to answer for it is usually gone, and all that's left are innocent people looking at each other with nowhere to put the anger. Nothing. Daniel took his daughter's hand and left the building without the job. That was the part that should be understood clearly. Victoria offered it to him in the elevator lobby, the position that day, whatever shift he wanted. And he said no, and walked out through the revolving doors into the noise of the street and gave up the exact thing he had come downtown to get. The rent was due in 3 days now. He had ridden the train 40 minutes that morning to beg for $11 an hour, and he walked away from it because taking it in that moment would have meant becoming something in that woman's story. And he had just learned he had been something in it for 39 years without being consulted. For 3 days, he did not answer his phone. The calls came from a number he did not recognize, then from a number he did, then from the main switchboard of Hale Global. He let them all go. He went to the library with Lily and looked at nothing. He made grilled cheese. He sat in the kitchen after she was asleep with the lights off. He did not want the woman's money. He did not want a house with a gate on it. And he did not know whether he wanted a second mother at 39, delivered by a file folder, because he had had one. Ruth Mercer had been his mother in every way that had ever mattered. She was the one who packed his lunch and pressed a cool washcloth to the back of his neck when he had a fever, who worked doubles at the county hospital so that he could have a bicycle and then a graduation suit. She taught him without ever once explaining why the particular set of things she knew he would need out there, how to be early, how to keep his voice level, how to keep his hands visible, how to say thank you to a man who had just told him no. Every one of those lessons had been in his body that Thursday morning in the lobby. She had put them there. To accept Victoria Hale as anything at all felt like standing over Ruth's grave and telling her she had been a substitute. And Ruth had died 5 years ago without telling him. He had sat with her in that room at the end. He had held her hand. She had had time and words and every opportunity. And she had used them to tell him where the deed to the house was and to remind him to check the furnace filter in October. Now he knew she had signed her name on the line. The anger when it came did not have one target, and he made himself notice that. He was angry at Victoria for surviving with all that money and all that silence. He was angry at Samuel for a signature. He was angry at a world that arranged itself this way. And he was angry at himself most of all, because underneath everything, he still wanted to know the rest of it, and wanting to know felt like a betrayal of the only mother he had ever met. Everything. On the 4th day, the rent was due. He did not call Victoria Hale. It did not occur to him as an option. It lived in a category of thing that was not available to him. What he did instead was get down on the floor of his bedroom and pull out the steel toolbox from under the bed where it had sat for 7 years, and set it on the mattress and open it. His father's tools. Wrenches worn bright at the jaws, a meter with a cracked face that still read true. The handle of the box itself had been rubbed smooth in the middle by a hand that was no longer anywhere. Daniel took a rag and cleaned each piece the way the man had taught him to, working from the largest to the smallest. Then he closed the lid, carried the box 3 blocks to the pawn shop on the corner, and set it on the counter. He kept one thing. A screwdriver, the smallest one in the set, worth nothing to anybody. He put it in his jacket pocket and did not explain to himself why. He paid the rent that afternoon with the last thing his father had left him. It was in the same week he stopped being certain he had ever known who his father was. That night Lily found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with the screwdriver lying on the table in front of him. "Daddy, are you sad?" "A little bit." She thought about that. She climbed up into his lap, which was getting to be a tight fit and would not be possible much longer, and put her head against his collarbone. "So do you have 2 moms now?" Daniel started to say something, and found there was nothing on the other end of it. "Because you could have 1 mom in heaven and 1 mom you just met." For the first time in days, Daniel Mercer smiled. He sat in a dark kitchen with his arms around an 8-year-old and smiled until his eyes stung. Children have a way of making impossible things sound simple, and in 11 words she had said what he'd failed to say to himself in 3 days, that the 2 of them did not have to be in competition. Ruth Mercer had raised him. That was finished and safe and could not be taken back by anything in a folder. Whatever the other woman was, she was a separate question, and separate questions could be answered one at a time. On Monday morning, he took the train downtown and was in the lobby of Hale Global at 10 minutes to 9. He did not go to the facilities office. He waited by the elevator bank near the stretch of stone where the coffee had been. When Victoria came through with Ellen Ward half a step behind her, he stepped forward before she could say his name. "I'll take the job." Victoria stopped. Everything she had prepared to say over 4 days went out of her head. "Daniel, the janitor position, if it's still open." "The janitor position?" "Yes." When a large truth arrives, the first reaction is almost never the right one, and it does not have to be. It took Daniel 3 days of silence to be able to walk back through those doors. If you are holding something difficult to tell someone, remember this. People don't need you to explain yourself right away. They need to be given time. And if you are the one who just received the news, going quiet for a few days isn't weakness. It's how a heart rearranges the furniture in its own house. For a moment, Victoria Hale stood in the lobby of her own building and could not think of a single thing to do with her hands. She had spent 4 days rehearsing versions of this conversation, and in every one of them she was the one speaking. She had prepared an apology and discarded it. She had prepared an explanation and discarded that too. What she had not prepared for was the possibility that the man would come back and ask for the mop.
Daniel, you don't have to do this.
I know, but I need to. He said it without any heat. He needed the work and he needed the hours. He needed to get up at a particular time and be somewhere and come home tired, because a man who has been out of work for 3 months learns that the shape of a day is not a small thing. His daughter needed to see him leave the apartment in the morning. And somewhere underneath that, in a place he was not ready to look at directly, he needed to be in the same building as this woman for long enough to understand her. Because understanding her was the only route he could see to understanding his own father. Victoria heard all of it, and reached for the only instrument she had ever learned to use. Let me put you somewhere better. Facilities has a supervisor opening on 11, or a coordinator role. You have technical experience, you'd be wasted on a cart. There's an apartment the company keeps 2 blocks from here that sits empty most of the year. Whatever you want, Daniel, name it. The offer came out of her fast and in one breath. Ellen Ward, standing 3 steps back with a tablet against her chest, looked at the floor. Daniel waited until she had finished. I applied to clean floors. Don't turn me into a charity project. He said it quietly. That was what made it land. It landed clean and thin, and in that instant Victoria Hale understood she had tried to buy her way into her son's life with a job title and an apartment 48 hours after learning he existed. Honestly, at that point in the story, you want him to take it. The rent had just been paid with his father's toolbox, and Lily still needed shoes that fit. But the longer it sat, the clearer it became that he was right, and not out of pride. What gets handed over in a moment of feeling can be taken back in another moment of feeling. What a man makes with his own hands, nobody gets to reclaim. Daniel probably understood that better than anyone in that lobby. When people have decided your life for you once, you do not let it happen a second time. It was the first lesson Victoria Hale ever received from the child she had buried. She received it standing up in front of her assistant at 9 in the morning. Love cannot begin with control. He started that Thursday on the evening shift. 11 days later, a man named Gerald Prescott asked Daniel to come to a conference room on the 31st floor. Prescott had been the family's attorney for 26 years, since before there was a Hale Global. He had a courteous, unhurried manner and a habit of removing his glasses before saying anything unpleasant. He was not a cruel man. He had watched Victoria's father operate up close and had spent a quarter of a century making sure nothing ever again came at her sideways. He had a folder of his own. He set out its contents in the plain language of a man who considered himself to be doing a favor. Ms. Hale's position is unusual and it's exposed. I've drawn up an arrangement that protects everyone. There's a payment here, a substantial one, more than substantial, and in exchange there's an acknowledgement that no claim will be brought against the estate or the company now or later. It's clean. It ends the ambiguity for both of you. Daniel looked at the papers on the table. He did not read a line of them. You keep both halves. I didn't come here for her money. And I'm not signing a piece of paper that says I'm not her son. Prescott put his glasses back on and did not say anything for a while. It was, in its way, the most respectful thing he could have done. Victoria found out that evening. She did not shout at Prescott. He had done only what he'd been paid for 26 years to do. And she recognized with some discomfort that 10 days earlier she would have asked him to do it herself. She found Daniel on the 14th floor at 7:30 restocking a supply closet. Gerald showed me the agreement. I didn't ask him for it. That isn't an excuse. It came from my office, and it came from a way of thinking I taught everyone around me. I'm sorry, Daniel. He turned around. He waited for the second half, the part where the apology arrived attached to a remedy, a check, a title, a car, something. It did not come. She said what she had come to say, and then she stood there with nothing. It was the first time in her adult life Victoria Hale had apologized to anyone without offering compensation in the same sentence, and both of them understood that something had happened, even if neither of them named it. Lily came to the building most evenings that fall because school let out at 3 and the shift ran until 10, and the arrangement that emerged without anyone proposing it was that she did her homework in the small conference room on 12 while her father worked the floor. Victoria did not know how to talk to an 8-year-old. This was a genuine and slightly humiliating discovery. She had negotiated with the chief executives of 4 continents. She had once talked a hostile board out of a proxy fight in a single afternoon. She stood in the doorway of that conference room on a Tuesday in October and could not locate a single opening sentence. Lily solved it by holding out a colored pencil. You can do the sky. There was a drawing on the table, a house and a tree, and 3 figures of ambiguous size, and a large blank region above all of it. Victoria sat down in a chair that was too low for the table, and took the pencil and set the tip against the paper, and began filling in the space with small, even strokes, staying inside the pale line the girl had drawn along the top of the house. You can go outside the lines if you want. My dad says it's okay. Victoria's hand stopped. Then she took the pencil and drew a long blue stroke straight out past the border and off the edge of the page. It was the first thing she had done wrong on purpose in 39 years. Weeks went by. That was the part of it that could not be shortened, and it should not be. There was no scene in which everything was resolved. There was a man pushing a cart down a corridor at 9 at night, humming something under his breath, working from one end of a floor to the other in an order that made sense to him. And there was a woman on 52 who found herself standing at the glass some evenings, watching a cart move along a hallway 2 buildings worth of distance below her. Before she went back to her desk, they spoke gradually in the way people do when neither has a script. He told her about the elevators, about the shafts, the cables the sound a failing bearing makes. She told him about a radio shop with a cracked front window. Neither of them pushed. There were long stretches where nothing was said at all, and those turned out to be the parts that helped. One night in November, she came down to 14 after 10 and found him crouched beside the cart in an empty corridor with the front caster off, working at the housing with a small screwdriver. You could call maintenance for that. I was maintenance. Before I was a janitor. She looked at the tool in his hand, at the worn grip of it, and did not ask, and he did not tell her that it was the only piece of his father's set he had not sold. He got the bearing seated, spun the wheel with one finger to check it, and started working the housing back on. Victoria set her bag down on the carpet. Then she lowered herself to the floor beside him and sat with her back against the wall. She was 59 years old and wearing a suit that cost more than his rent. She sat down on the floor of a corridor in her own building because it was the only place in the world where she could be at eye level with him. She had spent 39 years wanting to know one thing. Not where the child was, she had believed that question closed. What she wanted to, through every acquisition and every award and every empty Sunday, was to know whether she should have believed her father. Whether the man who told her that love was a luxury and then told her that her baby had not survived had been protecting her or disposing of her, and whether some part of his objection to a young man who fixed radios at night had ever been about anything other than money. She had never had the courage to ask him, and then he had died, and the question had calcified into the permanent architecture of her life. Sitting on that floor, watching a man's hands turn a screw the way another man's hands had once turned a screw on a shop counter in front of her, she understood that the answer had stopped mattering. The only person who could give it had been in the ground for 11 years, beyond the reach of any accusation she might still want to make. And the only person the lie had actually cost was sitting 18 inches away from her with a caster in his hand, alive, breathing, 40 minutes from the end of his shift. For the first time in 39 years, neither of them was trying to repair the past. They were simply sitting there. In the end, 3 names were needed to say what they were. On the morning of that first day, they were strangers, one applying for work, the other signing off on the payroll that would pay him. By that afternoon, the law would call them close relatives, bound by a document neither had asked for. By November, they were 2 people learning what blood alone cannot do. A bloodline only reveals a connection. Time, decency, and forgiveness make it love. Sometimes the greatest thing someone finds after getting lost is not money or a title or even a second chance. Sometimes it is a human being who should never have gone missing in the first place. On a Monday morning in December, Daniel came in early and pushed his cart across the lobby. The route took him over the stretch of polished stone near the elevator bank where a paper cup had once gone over the arm of a wheelchair. He stopped for a second. There was nothing there. The floor was dry and clean. The extension cord had been rerouted months ago to a wall outlet by a different crew. He went on. 52 floors up, a woman stood behind glass and watched a small figure cross the lobby with a cart. She said nothing and sent no one down. Lily was sitting on the low bench by the security desk with her backpack beside her, waiting for the school bus that stopped on the corner at 8:15. She finished tying the pink shoe. She had gotten good at it that fall, though the loops still came out uneven, and looked up at her father. "Daddy, is she our family's?" Daniel rested both hands on the cart handle and thought about it for a while. Because she deserved a real answer and not a comfortable one. Not yet, but I think she's trying. You cannot repair something that happened almost 40 years ago. But you can sit down on the floor next to somebody and say nothing at all. Sometimes mending doesn't begin with a perfect apology, it begins with showing up. One more evening, and then another one after that. If there's a door in your house that has been closed too long, today may not be the day to open it. But standing a little closer to it is allowed. If you have ever had to sit down beside someone instead of finding the words for them, tell about it in the comments. Everyone gets read.